Imagine getting a text from your loved one. A photo full of joy and promises of a beautiful night under the stars. Now, imagine that photo is the last time you ever see them. For over a decade, this single, beautiful image was a ghost, a silent scream frozen in time. What happened to the husband and his pregnant wife who vanished into the vast, unforgiving silence of Joshua Tree National Park? The truth was buried, not just in the desert sand, but in a lie so perfect it fooled everyone for 11 long years. But the desert doesn't forget. One day, a hiker's simple act of curiosity would unearth a discovery that would blow this cold case wide open. Before we dive into this chilling true story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into a case that will keep you on the edge of your seat. In the summer of 2011, the vast sun-bleached expanse of Joshua Tree National Park was the setting for what was supposed to be a final, peaceful adventure. Jenna Dinger, a beloved elementary school teacher, was 7 months pregnant and filled with a radiant glow that only a mother-to-be can have. Beside her was her husband Marcus, a kind-hearted man whose excitement for fatherhood was a tangible, joyous thing. They were on a baby moon, a camping trip to reconnect before their lives were forever changed by the arrival of their first child. Their last message to the world arrived with the sterile ping of a satellite phone connecting to a distant signal. For Chloe, Jenna's younger sister, this modern miracle was a source of immense comfort. Her sister was miles away, in a remote and primitive part of the park, yet still reachable. The photo that materialized on Chloe's phone was a perfect capsule of pure happiness. Jenna, radiant in a blue sweater, was seated serenely before a lime green tent, her baby bump prominent and proud. Behind her, Marcus knelt, his arm wrapped protectively around her, a wide, happy grin splitting his bearded face. It was the epitome of a perfect moment, a final adventure before their world was forever changed. A simple text followed, all set up for the night. The dessert is beautiful. Love you. Chloe, filled with a sense of peace and sisterly love, sent back heart emojis and a gentle reminder for Jenna to stay hydrated. She went to bed that night picturing them under a brilliant canopy of desert stars. That was yesterday. Now the afternoon sun cast long, anxious shadows across Chloe's living room floor. And the silence from Joshua Tree had grown from peaceful to deeply unsettling. They had a plan, a simple one, born of Chloe's own nagging worries. Jenna was supposed to call by noon just to confirm everything was fine. It was a concession to Chloe's anxiety about her heavily pregnant sister sleeping on the ground, even with the comfortable backup of their new camper van nearby. But noon had come and gone. At first, Chloe tried to reason away her fears. Maybe they slept in. Maybe they went for a short hike and lost track of time. Starlink's satellite system was new. Perhaps it was finicky. But as 1 o'clock became 3 and 3 bled into 5, the flimsy rationalizations wore thin, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She called Jenna's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called Marcus. The same result. Image on her phone, once a source of pure joy, now looked like a haunting ghost. The smile seemed frozen, the desert landscape behind them vast and menacing. The camper van, a symbol of safety and preparedness, was just a silent white box in the background. Every detail that had been reassuring yesterday now felt like a source of terror. Why hadn't they packed up and left? Why hadn't they at least driven to a place with a cell signal? The questions circled in her mind, each one darker than the last. By sunset, the knot of fear in her stomach was too tight to ignore. Her hands trembling slightly, she looked up the non-emergency number for the National Park Service dispatch at Joshua Tree. A calm, professional voice on the other end. Of the line listened patiently as Chloe explained the situation. A 37-year-old pregnant woman and her 42-year-old husband, overdue for a check-in. She forwarded the photo, the last, heart-stopping proof of life, and described their vehicle, a white Ram ProMaster camper van. The Ranger was reassuring, but the underlying procedure was clear. This was now a priority. 2 park rangers were dispatched as the last light of day faded from the sky, their headlights cutting a lonely path into the immense darkness of the park. They knew the general area the Dingers favored, a semi-secluded spot away from the main campgrounds. It took the Rangers nearly an hour of driving on paved roads and then graded dirt tracks before they saw it. Bathed in the stark white of their vehicle's searchlight, The scene looked exactly like the photo Chloe had sent. The white camper van was parked on a level patch of ground. About 30 feet away, the lime green tent stood taut against the gentle night breeze. It was a perfect, peaceful tableau. But as the Rangers approached on foot, their boots crunching on the gritty sand, the silence was absolute. There was no flicker of a campfire, no murmur of conversation. "Mr. Dinger, Mrs. Dinger." One of the Rangers called out, his voice swallowed by the immense empty space. The only reply was the whisper of the wind through the creosote bushes. They circled the campsite. 2 camp chairs were angled toward a cold, unused fire pit. The tent flap was zipped shut. A quick look inside with a flashlight revealed 2 empty sleeping bags neatly laid out. They tried the doors of the camper van locked. Everything was in its place, tidy and expectant, as if the occupants had simply evaporated into the dry desert air. With the first light of dawn, the campsite transformed from a place of eerie silence into a full-blown crime scene. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape, a stark, artificial boundary against the natural landscape of twisted trees and ancient rock. The initial park rangers had given way to county sheriff's deputies and a team of investigators. Their first priority was gaining access to the locked camper van, which sat like a sealed metal tomb in the center of the unfolding drama. Rather than break a window, they called in a locksmith, a decision rooted in the desperate hope of preserving every shred of potential evidence. As the locksmith worked, the lead detective, a man hardened by years of investigating crimes in these vast empty spaces, surveyed the scene. Everything was too perfect. In his experience, when people went missing in the wilderness, their campsites were often a mess, a sign of a hasty departure, a medical emergency, or an animal attack. This was different. This was sterile. The click of the van's lock breaking the morning silence was jarring. The side door slid open with a smooth metallic sigh, revealing the interior. The investigators peered inside, and the mystery only intensified. The small, custom-built living space was immaculate. A bed in the back was neatly made. On a small kitchenette counter, a half-empty bag of trail mix was clipped shut. A water bottle was full, and there, placed carefully side by side, were Marcus and Jenna Dinger's wallets. An investigator, wearing latex gloves, carefully opened them. Inside was cash, credit cards, and their driver's licenses. Next to the wallets lay a secondary cell phone, an older model they likely kept for emergencies. And next to that, a bottle of Jenna's prenatal vitamins, a poignant symbol of the life that was supposed to be. The discovery of the wallets and phone was a critical turning point. People who choose to disappear to start a new life take their money and identification. People who get lost on a hike would have their wallets on them. No one, absolutely no one, would leave their pregnant wife's essential medication behind. The scene screamed that whatever had happened to the Dingers, it had not been planned by them. They had intended to return to this van. The only things missing were the couple themselves, the clothes on their backs, and the primary smartphone that had sent that final happy photo. The lack of any sign of a struggle inside the van was just as perplexing. There were no overturned items, no scuff marks on the floor, no trace of violence. It was as if they had been called out of the van and had simply walked away, leaving the entire infrastructure of their lives behind. As search and rescue teams began a grim, often fruitless grid search of the unforgiving desert, the investigative team turned their focus to the digital and financial lives of Marcus and Jenna Dinger. On the surface, they were a well-liked couple with no known enemies. Jenna was a beloved teacher, Marcus a self-employed business consultant. Their life seemed as orderly and untroubled as the interior of their van. But in any investigation, the surface is just the starting point. The first crack in that perfect facade appeared 2 days into the investigation. A financial crimes detective found something the standard credit reports had missed. Marcus Dinger had a staggering amount of private debt from high-interest lenders. It was the kind of desperate money a person takes on when they can no longer secure conventional loans. And according to the payment schedules, he was on the verge of defaulting. This discovery changed everything. Suddenly, Marcus Dinger wasn't just a missing person. He was a man under immense secret pressure. He had a powerful motive to escape his life. The question that hung in the air of the detective's office was chilling. Is that motive powerful enough for him to discard his pregnant wife? This grim hypothesis gained terrifying momentum when a new lead came in. A gas station attendant over 100 miles from the park called the tip line. He remembered a man who matched Marcus's photo. The man had come in 2 nights after the Dingers were last heard from. He seemed jumpy, the attendant recalled. He paid for gas with crumpled bills pulled from his pocket, bought a prepaid burner phone, and most tellingly, a detailed paper road atlas of the American Southwest. The attendant remembered it because it was such an old-fashioned purchase. For the investigators, this was the missing piece. A man with a secret crippling debt. A wife who likely just discovered it, a remote location. And now, a credible sighting of the husband alone buying the exact tools a fugitive would need to disappear off the grid. The narrative wrote itself. An argument in the desert turned deadly. Marcus, in a panic, hides his wife's body in the vast wilderness and flees, using a 2-day head start to begin his new life as a wanted man. The hardest part of the job was delivering this news to the family. The lead detective met with Chloe at her home and laid out the facts as neutrally as he could. He watched as the hope that had sustained her for days curdled into disbelief and then into raw fury. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "Absolutely not. Not Marcus." She told the detective how Marcus had spent weeks building the baby's crib by hand, how he would read to Jenna's belly every night, how he cried with joy when they saw the first ultrasound. He wasn't a man running from his life. He was a man running toward it. "You're wrong," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "He would die for her. He wouldn't hurt her. He is a victim just like she is." In that moment, 2 irreconcilable stories were born. For the police, Marcus Dinger was a fugitive and their prime suspect. For his family, he was another missing person, and the police were wasting precious time chasing a ghost. The initial frantic energy of the search for the Dingers inevitably slowed, then stalled, and finally dissipated like a desert mirage. The seasons turned over Joshua Tree National Park. The fierce heat of summer was followed by the crisp, cold nights of winter. The yellow crime scene tape was long gone, and nature had reclaimed the small patch of cleared earth. In the sheriff's department, the Dinger case file was moved to a drawer and eventually to a shelf in the records room. A thick manila folder filled with dead ends and unanswered questions. It was now officially a cold case. For 11 years, the desert kept it secret. The sun bleached the landscape, the wind shifted the sands, and the memory of the missing couple faded into the realm of cold, dusty files. The world moved on. Then, in October 2022, a man named Derek Vincent, a software engineer from Seattle, sought a brief escape from the city's gray drizzle and decided to venture off the beaten path in Joshua Tree. He was an experienced hiker, drawn to the solitude of the park's less-traveled corners. He wasn't following a trail, just his own curiosity. The call of nature came upon him suddenly. He spotted a large, weathered cluster of granite boulders that would offer a bit of privacy and began walking toward it. As he rounded the corner of the largest rock, his eyes scanned the ground, and he stopped. Something was out of place. In a small, shallow depression, the sandy soil was clearly disturbed. It was loose and churned up, littered with the kind of debris that suggested recent animal activity. In the center of the disturbed earth, he saw a glint of white. He nudged it with the toe of his hiking boot, expecting it to be a light piece of plastic or a sun-baked bone from a bighorn sheep. The object didn't just move. The sand around it crumbled away, revealing more of its shape. In that instant, the world tilted on its axis for Derek Vincent. It wasn't one bone. It was a series of them, fused together in a horrifyingly recognizable pattern. The curve he had seen was the elegant arching shape of a human rib. He was looking at a human rib cage. He stumbled back, a gasp of cold air catching in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, profound silence of the desert. He scrambled for his phone, his fingers fumbling, clumsy with a sudden rush of adrenaline, stabbed at the screen, dialing 911. The voice of the dispatcher was a calm, grounding presence in his swirling panic. 911, what is your emergency? I found something, Derek stammered, his voice thin and reedy. A body, I think. Bones. Human bones. He was told to stay put and not to touch anything. After he hung up, he sat on a rock a good 50 feet away, his back to the site, unable to look again. Just stared out at the empty desert, The image of the rib cage burned into his mind. Within the hour, the silence was broken by the distant sound of approaching vehicles. 2 park rangers arrived first, their faces grim. They confirmed the remains were human and immediately established a wide perimeter. The initial rangers were soon joined by sheriff's deputies and the county's forensic investigation unit. The lead forensic archaeologist, a woman with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen more than most, directed the operation with quiet authority. This was not a recovery, it was an excavation. With the delicate precision of surgeons, her team began to remove the layers of sand and soil, 1 grain at a time. As the afternoon wore on, the full extent of the burial was revealed. The skeleton was remarkably complete, preserved by the dry desert air. It was positioned in a seated, almost fetal position. The skull was intact, the empty eye sockets staring out at a world that had moved on without them for more than a decade. It was the skeleton of an adult female. As the team carefully brushed away the last of the sand from the abdominal and pelvic region, the lead archaeologist suddenly paused. She motioned for her colleague to look. There, nestled within the protective cradle of the female skeleton's pelvic bones, lay another, impossibly small and fragile skeleton. The tiny, delicate bones of a skull, a miniature rib cage, the thread-like bones of limbs. It was the perfectly formed skeleton of a fetus, lying exactly where it had been in its mother's womb. A hush fell over the entire team. This wasn't just 1 victim, it was 2. After 11 years of silence, buried under layers of sand and secrets, Jenna Dinger and her unborn child had finally been found. The discovery of Jenna Dinger's remains sent a seismic shockwave through the county sheriff's department. The Dinger file, a cold case so dormant it was practically fossilized, was abruptly reactivated. This was no longer a missing persons case, shadowed by the ambiguous possibility of a husband on the run. This was a homicide. The location of the grave in a remote, almost inaccessible part of the park immediately nullified the long-held theory that Marcus had killed his wife in a spontaneous fit of rage near their campsite and fled. This burial was deliberate, calculated, and required intimate knowledge of the park's hidden corners. The fugitive theory, which had guided the investigation for over a decade, evaporated under the harsh desert sun. The entire case had been reset to 0. A new task force was assembled, blending veteran detectives who remembered the original case with younger officers, who brought fresh perspectives and familiarity with new forensic technologies. Their first and most critical task was a complete review of the mountain of old evidence. A detective named Miles Corbin, a man nearing retirement, was assigned the painstaking job of rereading every report. Every interview transcript, every dead-end lead in the original file. The 3rd day he came across the supplemental report from 2017, the discovery of the hidden compartment in the camper van. He pulled up the digitized images of the geological maps, their surfaces covered in Marcus Dinger's cryptic handwritten notes. A jolt went through him. He cross-referenced the GPS coordinates from the newly discovered gravesite with the annotations on the maps. It was a perfect match. The shallow pit where Jenna and her baby were found lay directly within a large hand-drawn circle on one of Marcus's surveys. The forgotten clue, the baffling discovery that had led nowhere 6 years prior, was suddenly the Rosetta Stone of the entire investigation. The maps weren't just a random curiosity. They were a direct link between the victim and the place of her burial. Marcus Dinger hadn't been a simple tourist. He'd been drawn to that specific desolate spot for a reason. The question was no longer if he was there, but why. While Corbin was connecting the dots of the past, the remains of Jenna and her child were undergoing a meticulous examination at the county medical examiner's office. The forensic anthropologist assigned to the case faced a formidable challenge. 11 years in the desert had erased all soft tissue, leaving only bone. Determining a precise cause of death would be difficult, if not impossible. Unwilling to give up, the anthropologist employed a more advanced technique. Scanning electron microscopy. Under the immense magnification of the electron microscope, she found something. Embedded in the porous microscopic matrix of the bone surface were tiny, almost infinitesimal particles of a fine granular dust. The particles were metallic and unusually dense. This was a foreign substance introduced to the bone at or around the time of death. The discovery was highly unusual. She carefully collected a sample of the trace particles and sent them to a specialized forensics lab. The question was simple. What was this mysterious dust, and where did it come from? The investigation now had two powerful converging lines of inquiry. The first was the map, which proved that the burial site was a premeditated destination. The second was the microscopic dust, a physical clue, that held the potential to link a suspect directly to the victim's body. The task force pivoted. They set aside the old theories about marital strife and financial desperation. They now believed the key to this murder lay not in the Dingers' personal lives, but in Marcus's secret professional one. They were no longer hunting for Marcus's Dinger. They were hunting for his associates. They were looking for the other player in the dangerous game that had led him and his pregnant wife to that desolate spot in the desert. The ghost of Marcus the fugitive was finally laid to rest, replaced by the image of Marcus the victim, a man who had stumbled upon a secret worth killing for. The new direction led them straight back to a man named Leland Croft, Marcus's former business partner. His name had appeared in the original case file, but only peripherally. He had been interviewed briefly in 2011, but with the fugitive theory in full force, there had been no reason to look at him more closely. Now he was the center of everything. As they dug, the pieces began to snap into place with an alarming clarity. Leland Croft wasn't just a business consultant. His personal passion, bordering on obsession, was geology. Had subscriptions to obscure mining journals, receipts for rock tumblers, and most tellingly, records of purchasing specialized geological survey software. The cryptic notes on Marcus maps suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't Marcus notes. They were likely Leland's. A chilling theory emerged. The consulting business was a front, or at the very least, Leland Croft was using its legitimate operations as a cover for his true passion: illegal prospecting for valuable rare earth minerals within the protected boundaries of Joshua Tree National Park. The partnership hadn't ended over simple business disagreements. It had ended because Marcus Dinger, an honest man, had discovered what Leland was doing. The crippling debt wasn't a sign of Marcus's failure. It was a weapon Leland was using against him in their dispute. The baby moon camping trip was now seen in a terrifying new light. It wasn't a final romantic getaway. Marcus, likely armed with copies of the maps and other evidence he had gathered, had gone to Joshua Tree not to relax, but to put a stop to Leland's illegal operation. He had brought Jenna along, most likely under the guise of the baby moon, never revealing the true perilous nature of their trip. The camper van wasn't just for comfort. It was a mobile base of operations for a man who was about to blow the whistle on a secret enterprise worth a considerable amount of money. Leland Croft was no longer a person of interest. He was the prime suspect. The motive was clear and powerful: silencing Marcus to protect his lucrative illegal operation. The investigators revisited the original sighting at the gas station, the one that had sent the investigation down the wrong path for 11 years. They pulled the grainy surveillance footage from 2011. The quality was poor. But the man at the counter bore a definite passing resemblance to Leland Croft. It was now sickeningly clear what had likely happened. Leland hadn't just killed the Dingers. He had brilliantly and cynically orchestrated the aftermath. He had murdered his partner and the only witness, then driven miles away to a random gas station where he, a man who looked vaguely like Marcus, deliberately bought the items a fugitive would need. He had created a false trail, a perfect piece of misdirection that had successfully diverted all suspicion from himself for over a decade. He had not only committed the perfect crime, but had framed a dead man for it. The task force now had a solid, coherent theory, a compelling motive, and strong circumstantial evidence linking Leland Croft to the victims. But they knew it wasn't enough. They had a story, but they needed proof. The entire weight of the case now rested on the results from the forensics lab. Leland Croft was found in a small, sun-drenched town in central Oregon, a world away from the harsh deserts of Southern California. He was the owner of Croft's Hardware and Feed, a tidy, well-organized store that smelled of sawdust and honest work. When Detective Corbin and his younger partner walked in, Leland was advising a customer. He was 54 now, thicker around the middle, his hair gray at the temples, but he had the same calm, assured demeanor they remembered from his original witness statement. He looked up, offering a polite smile that faltered slightly when he saw their badges. He agreed to accompany them to the local police station to clear up some old questions with a sigh of weary cooperation. as if this were a tedious but necessary piece of bureaucratic red tape from a lifetime ago. In the sterile, gray-walled interrogation room, Leland's composure was a fortress. He sat back in his chair, hands resting calmly on the metal table, and projected an air of patient helpfulness. He listened as Corbin began walking him back through the events of 2011. Leland's answers were smooth, consistent, and unchanged from his original story. Marcus was a good man, a bit of a dreamer, he said. He had a brief obsession with gold panning one year, then it was meteorite hunting. This was probably another one of his phases. He expertly deflected every piece of circumstantial evidence the detectives presented, turning the evidence of a secret operation into a character flaw of the victim. For a moment, a sliver of doubt entered Corbin's mind. Was it possible they were wrong? Was this all just a string of incredible coincidences? Then came a knock at the door. An officer entered and handed Detective Corbin a sealed evidence envelope. It was the report from the Materials Analysis Lab. This was the moment. Corbin opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the technical language. He looked up, his gaze locking with Leland's. The air in the room grew heavy. When the medical examiner inspected Jenna's remains, Corbin began, his voice low and steady. She found something unusual, a fine metallic dust embedded in the bones of her neck. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. We sent a sample to the lab for analysis. The substance is called thorite, Leland. It's a radioactive rare earth mineral. It's not something you just find anywhere. In fact, it's only found in commercially viable concentrations in a few places in North America. One of those places happens to be the exact isolated patch of desert where you were prospecting and where we found Jenna's body. For the first time, a crack appeared in Leland Croft's fortress. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening of the muscles in his jaw, a flicker of something cold and dark in his eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice was a dry rasp, a contamination from the soil. It's a coincidence.
No.
The words were weak, lacking the confident authority he had projected moments before. The science was a wall he couldn't talk his way around. Before Leland could recover, Corbin's partner slid a second file across the table. He opened it to reveal 2 photographs side by side. This is what really changes things, Leland, the younger detective said, his tone sharp. We reanalyzed the original crime scene photos from inside the camper van. We found a faint dusty footprint on the van's interior step. He then pointed to the second photo. This is the tread pattern from a pair of redback geological boots, a specialized brand. Your preferred brand according to your credit card records from that time. They're a perfect match. Leland stared at the photographs. The thorite had placed him at the burial site. The boot print placed him inside the van. The 2 pieces of evidence were like the jaws of a vice closing in on him from opposite sides. There was no more room for denial. There was nowhere left to run. The collapse was total. The calm, confident hardware store owner dissolved, replaced by a man drowning in a memory he had held underwater for 11 years. His shoulders slumped, the color drained from his face. He stared at his hands on the table as if they belonged to a stranger. A long, shuddering breath escaped his lips, a sound of profound and final defeat. He wasn't supposed to bring her, Leland whispered, the words tumbling out, thick with a decade of silence. He recounted the story in a broken, disjointed torrent. The meeting was his idea, a final, angry confrontation at his prospecting site. He was furious that Marcus was threatening to expose him. The argument escalated. Marcus was righteous, unbending. In a fit of pure rage, Leland had struck him with a heavy rock hammer he kept with his tools. Marcus went down and he didn't get up. And then he turned, and Jenna was standing there by the van, her face a mask of pure horror. She had seen everything. I didn't have a choice. He choked out the pathetic classic excuse of a murderer. He described in cold detail how he had killed her, buried her in a prospect pit he had already dug, and then returned for Marcus's body, dumping it down the shaft of a nearby abandoned mine he knew of. The trip to the gas station was a final, cynical masterpiece of inspiration. A way to throw the police off his trail forever by framing the man he had just murdered. The interrogation room was silent, except for the sound of Leland Croft's ragged, sobbing breaths. The fortress had crumbled to dust. The case, after 11 years of agonizing mystery, was finally, brutally closed. The confession of Leland Croft did not end the investigation. It launched its final grim chapter. While Croft was processed and held without bail, a massive search operation was mobilized. Its focus was now narrowed from the entirety of Joshua Tree National Park to a few square miles of rugged, mine-scarred badlands, the area Leland had described in his confession. The mission was no longer a search for a missing person, but a recovery operation. They needed to find Marcus Dinger. The terrain was treacherous, dotted with the open mouths of abandoned mine shafts from a long-forgotten prospecting boom. These shafts were vertical tombs, some hundreds of feet deep. Sending personnel down was deemed too dangerous. Instead, the task force brought in a specialized team from a state university's robotics lab. Their tools were a fleet of advanced remote-controlled drones small enough to navigate the narrow shafts, equipped with high-intensity lights and higher-resolution cameras. For 2 days, the operation unfolded under the relentless desert sun. The team worked methodically, moving from one abandoned mine to the next. On the afternoon of the second day, a drone was lowered into a particularly deep and narrow shaft, one that Leland had marked on a map from memory. At approximately 150 feet, the drone's camera tilted downwards, and the operator suddenly froze. At the very bottom of the shaft, tangled in a mess of discarded timber and rockfall, was a shape that was unmistakably human. The operator zoomed in, and the image sharpened, resolving into the chillingly clear sight of skeletal remains clad in the tattered remnants of clothing. A quiet, somber confirmation was relayed over the radio. They had found him. A specialized recovery team using a complex system of ropes and harnesses was dispatched to the shaft. The painstaking process took several hours. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the landscape, the remains of Marcus Dinger were brought back to the surface for the first time in 11 years. Dental records provided a swift and certain identification. With the recovery of both victims, the story of their disappearance was finally complete. Leland Croft, facing an ironclad case built on his own confession and the irrefutable forensic evidence, was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Chloe and the rest of her family, the verdict brought not joy, but a profound and aching sense of closure. The terrible weight of not knowing, which they had carried for more than a decade, was finally lifted. The desert, so vast and silent, held its secret for over a decade. It was a place of new beginnings, a final adventure that became a tomb. But in the end, it was also the desert itself, with its shifting sands and indifferent canyons that refused to let the truth remain buried. For Chloe and the families, the long nightmare was over. The closure they found wasn't joyful, but it was real. It was the brutal, final period on a sentence of unimaginable grief. Because some secrets, no matter how carefully they are hidden, are simply too heavy for the earth to hold. This story is a powerful reminder that even after years of silence, the truth can find a way to surface.
Ow! What part of this incredible cold case shocked you the most? Share your thoughts and feelings about Jenna and Marcus's story in the comments below. Your voice is an important part of our community, and we read every single one of your comments.